Bassem gave me a call and said, hey, we've got this opportunity to present, and maybe it's something interesting we can talk about from BSD and RIB and the specs business. And I know a little bit about KP and this group and thought it would be a good opportunity, so I'm like, sure, man, no problem. And then like a day or so later, I'm like, hang on, I know a little bit about this group of people, probably going to be interesting in some way, right? And I'm like, I'm not sure what I do is that interesting, so I'm having a bit of an anxiety over like, well, what can I say that's going to be interesting to these people? I sit there and I do my job every day, and I'm not sure what's particularly fascinating about it at times. So went through that little dilemma and crisis of confidence, and then I don't know how many of you guys listen to Joe Rogan. Any Joe Rogan fans? So I listened to Joe Rogan in the car, and I'm listening to him one day and driving into work, and he comes up with how his theory around his podcast is he just talks about stuff he thinks interesting with the hope that other people will also find it interesting. So what I find interesting is information and data and how it's used in our industry, and that's kind of how I came up with talking about this today. And it was a nice opportunity to bring our owners, partners, biggest customers, all three of the above, into this conversation and kind of share a little bit about what we're doing together as well as what we're doing at SpecLink and in the industry as a whole. Another quick piece of background is I came into this area, the construction tech, from a different place. I was more of a big data guy. So worked for Equifax, worked for LexisNexis, Fiserv, those kind of companies. And had a lot of meetings with real big financial institutions, insurance companies, where you'd sit down and talk about how to use information and data to make better decisions, to understand the market, et cetera. So I was excited when I came into construction tech in 2009. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Construct Connect, used to be CMD, Reconstruction Data. I worked there for a while and was excited to run out and talk to the manufacturers and be like, hey man, we got all this great information, we can give you better opportunity to learn the market and how to sort of, approach things better. And without being overly critical, the reception I got was completely different. I had to come back and sort of reassess and say, look, I actually have to sell the fact that you want to look at data and you want to use information, because a lot of the feedback I was getting is like, we've got a bunch of sales guys out there. If I want to know what's going on, I ask them. And I'm like, you're a multi-billion-dollar international company. You've got to be out of your freaking mind, right? I mean, I don't have to convince Citibank to use data, right? So that was kind of where my skewed perception of our industry was, coming from my background in 2009. The good news is it's changed a lot, right? So the acceptance of data and information in our systems and in the way we make decisions has changed, and is changing rapidly now as digitization approaches and people are really starting to adopt these things. So it's a little bit of the background of what I'm going to sort of talk about for the next sort of 10 minutes or so. And then I'll bring these guys up for some sort of curated Q&A, and then we'll open the floor to anyone. So we'll skip over that for now, because we're going to introduce you guys later. I hope. Do I have to point this anywhere? And that was it. Thanks, guys. It's Eric and Bassem. I know Bassem was on the agenda. I'm sorry you were looking at me, because he did such a great job yesterday. And the use of technology is clearly advancing the way we do presentations. Joe Rogan is the slides. That's right, he doesn't. He has Jamie though. He has Jamie. Who can do some Google searching for me? I actually do know. I think I know what the next slide is. Basically, what you're going to find is the information cycles in our industry is just a messy thing, right? And I've got some things I'm going to show around, just some data and statistics around there. But ultimately, you've got a lot of people using a lot of different applications. Very little flow of information and data. You've got a lot of people reinventing the wheel over and over again, doing the same research that was already done on the previous stage and the previous cycles, right? So ultimately, the big challenge that we see is building things that flow. I was going to talk about RIB first, but we'll skip that once you cue me up. No one knows who RIB is, I assume. You want me to try? Battery dead? So ultimately, that's really going to be the premise of this, is this previous sort of desire to not necessarily dive into the data world and use information in a very proactive way, frankly. And then ultimately, how messy it currently is today. I will take a step back and talk a little bit about RIB very briefly. So if you look at that tiny little slide with the globe on it, what you'll actually find, we're about a $300 million company. Much of that comes from the DACH region in Germany, where we are a bit of a name brand. We primarily sell a product called i2 or M2, whether you buy the online or the install version. And that is a big part of our business. Our North American footprint is close to invisible. Obviously, we're trying to change that. It's part of my job. But we do own quite a few companies here that haven't been sort of rebranded. So if you guys are familiar with US Cost and US CAD or any of these guys, they're all under our umbrella. Our biggest presence in North America, however, was BSD. BSD SpecLink, which is a specification software company. So talk a little bit about that for a moment. Is we're 4 years ago, so we're 39 years old this year. Up to the year 35, it was kind of a mom and pop style business. We basically had, I would say, you get your founder's mentality, and sometimes that reaches a ceiling. And that ceiling was around there. And that was a great little business, and people did very well from it. And the guys that left have a great life right now that I would happily step into. But ultimately, that was about our ceiling. We got some new investors came in, some new invigorated sort of growth. And then ultimately, in the last 4 to 5 years, made it up to, tell me when I can flick, made it up to about, I think we'll be at about 30 million in total sales this year. Really through a process of investing, getting into the cloud, enabling us to sort of take advantage of the market as it is. The final phase of that sort of growth is occurring now, or not the final phase, the next phase, really through our collaboration with Schneider Electric. Because of their ownership and their emphasis they put on the companies they own, I'll give you guys a lot of credit for this, they invest a lot of time and effort into us. It's given us sort of unprecedented access into a very large, very progressive manufacturer. And because of that access, we've been able to come up with some solutions that I genuinely don't think we'd have come up with on our own. And if we did, it would have probably taken us 3 or 4 more years to get there. And a lot of it is around the distribution of information throughout the system and sort of changing the way some things are done. So I've jumped across about 7 of my slides, so I'll paraphrase my way through some of these. Messy. Real shock to everybody, I'm sure. Messy flows of data, different people interacting, different apps. There's some statistics. They're not going to surprise anybody in the room, I don't think. Projects are incredibly complex, almost always over budget and over schedule. Labor shortage. You guys are all familiar with that one, I would think. Profitability is always a big challenge. And then ultimately getting into sustainability and how we can do that. All of these things can benefit from better use of information, better data flow. Somebody mentioned yesterday, that's a big opportunity. Actually, Bassem did through BIM and moving into how we do things more efficiently to drive some of these margins and to improve some of these data and statistics. As the use of data is almost entirely unstructured. It's almost entirely uncaptured. It goes unused, and we spend an enormous amount of time trying to find stuff that we probably should already know or should have much better access to. So, again, no real big surprises in this, I don't think. What it really says to me is opportunity, right? If we can solve some of these problems, and I'll put my hand up and say, we came up with, Matt here, who's my head of operations, come up to me and said, look, we have this team of about 18 engineers on staff, architects and engineers, and they research product data all the time, product information, whether or not we include it in our system. And it's not a trivial thing, it's a full sort of investigation into the product. And when we get done with that, we say, yes, you can go in, and we put you in our system as like a line item, and then we throw all that stuff away. So why do we do that? It's just all we've always done, right? So let's collect that maybe, and maybe there's some use for it somewhere, who knows, right? We can continue that forward. But it happens very much in the design phase, the build phase, passing over to FM in our industry all the time. Enormous amounts of research work goes in that doesn't get passed forward through the system and through the workflows. So what's been the answer in our industry typically when it comes to product information and using and finding products that best fit the criteria we need for our buildings? And if you ask me, the most typical answer is directories. Some logos up there. There's, say, hundreds of these. There's some big ones, small ones, niche players, global players. I would include us, SpecLink, in there. We're actually not really a directory service, but we, in a sense, kind of act as one in the way that we list products in our system. So that's typically been the way things have gone. So it's aggregated data and information. It's all searchable, sortable. The thing that we've seen over the last few years is the addition of additional assets to those directories and services, so people can pull, whether it's BIM objects or whatever, spec sheets, etc., from those total directory services. So they've improved. If you work for a directory service, I'm going to apologize now. I personally think it's pretty much dead already. It's certainly dying. We are partners with Dodge. They have a product called Suites. If you guys are familiar with Dodge Suites, it's kind of the industry standard for a long time. They will fairly openly tell you how quickly that business is dying. So why is it dying? Information in that business is out of date the minute it's published, right? You can ask these guys how hard it is to keep up all the information and product data out in the industry at all the different points that they serve it up as, and the minute you put it there, you make an adjustment to that product, it's immediately out of date. For a minute there, everyone thought web scraping was the answer to this. We've gone down this path. We've invested a couple $100,000 in scraping a whole bunch of information together to say, hey, we can serve all this up. We could use AI and machine learning and serve it up to people. The problem is, without human curation, a simple error can be a huge problem. So enormous amounts of liability involved. If we're going to give information to people, we need to make sure that, if you're doing some sort of a water barrier or to a building, that it actually is one, and it actually doesn't mean the building ends up leaking constantly once it's done. And it's a real example I was talking to one of our customers about the other day. Pay-for-play domination. So even if you do build a good directory and you do have people come to it and they do look for things, oftentimes it's dominated by the people that are paying to be at the top of the list versus really the best solution that you could look for your product. Finally, and easily the most importantly to me, directories are destinations unto themselves. You're asking somebody to leave their workflow, go to a destination, do their research, get the data they need, and then come back, right? That is not how things should work going forward, right? It's incumbent upon us to get into the workflow of our customers, whether they be architects, engineers, contractors, owners, who are using this data and information. So directories are incumbently non-workflow oriented things, which is really their inherent flaw. So as we look forward, just a few notes, again, I made a lot of these points that I've talked through, but really getting the information and data inside the tools that people are already using within their workflow, and really kind of taking a whatever it takes. And I would say, from my perspective, that's a change to what we've done historically. We've been a bit monolithic in how we've looked at the market and how we've looked at our customers. We have to be open to more partnerships, have to be open to integrations, and oftentimes co-opetition is going to be a thing. If we're truly going to be user-centric and get our information where it goes, we may have to partner with people we don't want to, historically. So the thing I hear at my advisory board meetings over and over again is, I need the right information delivered to the right people at exactly the right time. I don't want an email talking about how great your windows are when I'm working on my concrete spec. I don't want to talk about electrical systems when I'm not designing an electrical system or working with an engineer to do that. So it has to be delivered in the workflow as best we can with the right piece of information and the right literature they need. So, how are we eating our own dog food? Because I'm not up here trying to tell everybody we're doing a great job of this right now. It is an evolutionary process. We are trying to get better, but it's definitely a key for us going forward. So it's got a little bit of roadmap and a little bit of things that we're currently working on at SpecLink. Kind of covered this slide in my introduction, so I won't go over it again, but a little bit of an evolution of our company. Again, being 39 years old, but being sort of rapid growth the last few years, we're not really a startup, but we're kind of like a 35-year-old semi-startup kind of an environment we're trying to sort of foster. So, through this collaboration with Schneider Electric and the solutions that we're looking at providing, ultimately for them, but frankly any manufacturer, but also benefiting the community as a whole, just a quick sort of overview of what that ecosystem looks like. So just bear with me if we've not branded this, we've not product named it. There are pieces and parts of this sort of into this ecosystem. But ultimately, the driving part is this proprietary product specifications from a content standpoint. So working directly with folks like Eric and his team, the product managers, also to make sure we've got exactly the right content in there, written in a very dynamic way, so it can be extracted in all kinds of different methods and means for the needs that it has. Sales Engineer Hub, it's kind of a new thing. It's getting our information into the hands of the folks that work at the manufacturer who are reaching out to the industry. Excuse me. So they're all on a common platform, but again, accessing that single source of truth, data asset around their product information. Then also linking into SpecLink, which is our sort of tool in the market. We've got a few thousand customers out there, and we get sort of 10, 20,000 projects a year that kind of go through that system already. So using that as a distribution hub point and making sure this all syncs up together makes sense. So as we kind of build out on this sort of centralized system, we're looking at interface agnostic product selection tools, which really means, if you want it on your website, you want it in your Revit plugin, we can do that. If you want it on a mobile app, like trying to get this information where people need it and want it, as opposed to making them come to us for it, right? So right now, Schneider and USG actually are about to launch their version of this Revit plugin, fully integrated with our information, very consistent use of this proprietary product specs. Anytime you're doing a Sales Engineer Hub, you've got to have reporting analytics and a CRM. Moving on to the user end of this, connecting with architects, engineers, spec writers has always been our core. Thing I got to add to this slide is contractors, because reaching through Schneider's team and the engineering team, we've never really had a direct relationship with contractors. They don't typically write specs. You might edit them. There are always exceptions to everything, but generally speaking, that will be a part of this ecosystem too. We also have a very much a growing business in the owner channel. So companies like Amazon, Prologis, Starbucks are using our systems and having access to this central hub of information that we're building with direct relationships with manufacturers. So the more people we work with, like Schneider, to put this rich current information into the system and then distribute it out, the better this becomes. Owners also use our systems to implement their design standards. Just threw this one in as an example of a little product that we're working on right now for USG that Schneider are going to want as soon as they see it, is a little 3-part spec sheet tool. So it's one of the outputs that we have in our system. Again, instead of recreating it every time, using the information we have, simple software product becomes a quick output tool. It's again something that people need and use. That should also get up into our product selection tool and spread out into that ecosystem. Looking forward, as we sort of really roadmap this thing out, where else will this manifest itself? Commissioning, handover type solutions, tying back to specs and information that started out early. Two-way interfaces with BIM, whether it's Revit or whatever tool you're using for that. Cost estimating is an obvious place, being that we own 5 cost estimating companies within ROB. Will start manifesting itself through there, and again, externally. We have a lot of conversations with the EC3 data folks and talk about sustainability and integrating that kind of information into the system, feeding out to procurement, and then ultimately, on the left side, the manufacturer portal, which was really a way to directly connect with folks that are experts, that goes through the curation process from my team to make sure it sticks in the right format that it needs to be for our users and these other platforms to leverage. So that's really kind of the ecosystem we're looking to build. It's what the conversations with Schneider have led to. I find this stuff interesting because I want to improve the way information moves in the system. I know there's enormous amounts of room for improvement. I know we're nowhere near done, and we're just kind of getting started. But hopefully some of this stuff is of interest to some of the folks in this room and some of the things that are going on. What I want to do now is introduce my friends, owners, customers, all of the above. If you're going to get bought by somebody, not a bad company to get bought by, I'll be honest with you. The investment of time and effort they've put into us has really been quite shocking to me. I've been through a few of these, and it's not normally this way. So if you guys wouldn't mind just coming up and just briefly introducing yourself. Eric's my biggest customer. So Eric, take that seat right there, buddy. Because they do invest in the companies they buy, I'll give them that as well. But yeah, so Eric and Bassem, just introduce yourself briefly.
Eric Meadows, I lead the U.S. commercial teams for basically our electrical distribution project sales business for Schneider Electric.
I'm Bassem Ammouri. You met me yesterday. I'm looking after our partnerships like the one that we have with RIB, with Daimon.
All right, so I've got a few pre-scripted questions for you guys because I wanted to really make sure you had a platform to talk a little bit about what you guys are thinking with us, but also broader in the industry. And I apologize, I'm not good at memorizing questions, so I'm going to read them to you. But basically, Bassem, when we started this conversation, with the team at Schneider, and you were really our first point of contact there with the digital business, what challenges were you initially trying to overcome with the solution?
Sure, it's a lot of what we talked about yesterday. It's getting involved earlier with projects. For a manufacturer to be able to understand where and how our equipment business is being specified in the marketplace it's a new vision, it's a new perspective that we didn't have before, right? So very tactically, for our traditional business, it's an edge, and we hope that many manufacturers are using it. Just free flowing of information. We wanted to accelerate that. And more on the software side, we wanted to connect a lot of the solutions that we invested in previously. We talked yesterday about our BIM plugin, our BIM extension, to put our library of products into BIM. So a customer is in Revit, they're working on a design, they can access accurate product information, weights, dimensions, but they also need to generate a specification. So through this interface now, this integration, it's a very tactical value very tangible value for a spec writer who's going from the BIM model to a deliverable that they need. So it was quick too. It was a kind of a quick pilot for us to build together and get it out to the market, and it's been positive feedback so far.
Yep. And it's obviously an evolving thing for us with the change in direction with Schneider on the Revit and the Autodesk front. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all manifests and enriches that solution. Another question for Bassem. It's clear that Schneider's digital strategy is quickly evolving. What do you see as the next phase in this evolution? What do you think will be mean for the distribution of this integrated product information?
I think I think a gentleman asked the question yesterday about connecting around a common data environment. So we have a number of logos that we showed yesterday. How do we share that information, this type of product information, across multiple kind of entryways into this data environment? So building more integrations like this first one that we built with SpecLink. I think we've kind of done the acquisition and the quick scaling commercially, but I think we need to do some work on the back end to make sure it all works together to set up for kind of the next wave or the next phase of our growth.
All right, Eric, I'm going to throw one over to you. When we initially kicked off this initiative, maybe a little bit of background of what your team does might be helpful here, but what do you see as the key opportunities for Schneider and your team?
Yeah, so just to set the landscape, for those of you that are not in the construction industry, we do a couple $1 billion of electrical projects a year and that are specified, which means a design firm, an engineer of record are on there. Some small projects, like if you do a residential job, you're not going to have a specification necessarily about that. But my team calls on the design firms to actually go help influence the specs. Obviously design with Schneider, some of our Schneider offerings in there, but try to optimize and really help add value to those design firms. Everything that we do historically has been analog. On paper, you go into their office, there's a big plotter printer, they print it out, you highlight stuff, you look for things that you can tweak and change with pencil, colored markers. And what Daimon immediately brought to my attention was all of this can be digitized in SpecLive and SpecLink, and you have the ability to go through and sift through that data in real time in the case of SpecLive, right? And like a simple use case is there's a lot of water and wastewater projects going on right now. We could scan the database and see how many designers are working on a water project this moment, where are they, what type of water project, and help influence and guide all the value that Daimon was presenting before in the spec. So that's what we saw, and we're starting to realize some of that, right?
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Eric. A few more of these, one more for you. As we continue down the digitization path, how do you see the role of your team changing in order to sort of meet those evolving needs?
So I think it's a very simple analogy of, today we wouldn't imagine doing most business without using Microsoft Excel. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it didn't even exist, right? I think going forward, consultants, designers, engineers, my sales team, sales teams at other manufacturers will all have to know how to communicate and how to analyze data on platforms like these. It's going to be that much more efficient and that much more better. It's going to be like a printed out spreadsheet versus Excel.
For sure. So quantum leaps forward, hopefully. We'll see there. Throw this one back to Bassem. What other parts of the design workflow, as Schneider Electric, and you currently evaluating?
We're trying to create ways for designers and contractors to quantify sustainability impact of the project. So understand during the design phase, kind of project and estimate what the scope 2 or scope 3 impact would be for that project, and then track it throughout the building phase, right? Which is something we can do with M2 or the EC3 that you mentioned before. So that's really, again, the kind of the next area that we're trying to make tangible again, right? To make it something that we can look at, quantify, and track.
Thank you. And then the last one, just to both of you, can you share your thoughts on the role that manufacturers will play, as this digitization takes hold in the industry?
I think continuing to lean in. I think you asked a question yesterday about kind of the potential risk in taking some of these steps forward, but I think that's what we need to do, right? And I think manufacturers have a unique perspective and a vantage point, relationships where we can do that in a way that adds value without creating risk. But I think we need to kind of lean into it in sort of the ways that we're talking about today.
I think there's more risk in being the last to the party as a manufacturer than there is taking a bet and learning and working forward, being an early adopter.
Yeah. Now, it's amazing, again, going back to those sort of early experiences, I agree with you guys, there's so much opportunity out there for the company that moves forward, and there's a lot of our industry that can learn from other industries, right? And some of the things they've done, you don't have to convince people anymore to use information, but really as we improve the way we distribute it and getting it into the workflow, I think is incumbent on us all. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Just we're getting the wrap-up sign. I think you get us back a little bit back on track. Maybe have a chance for 1 or 2 questions from the room, and then just cut it off.
Yeah, Colin.
This is outside of anything that I know a lot about, so kind of a basic question. I'm curious, to what extent does this software take processes that are paper and pencil and bring them online? And I'm sure that comes with organization advantages, cloud advantages. Or to what extent is the software actually making decisions and really simplifying the process by having the software actually do important? And what are the challenges that go with that second? Because I imagine we had a quick question just about the liability of stamping and everything. And I'm sure that gets into real complexity, but what keeps us from making that second step if we're just mostly at the first?
So there's 2 companies out there like us. There's us and really Master Spec, which is part of Delta, right? So people ask about our competitors, and usually they look that way. Our competitor by far is Microsoft Word, right? Most of this stuff today is done in Word, right?
Adobe PDF.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and the markups on PDFs. That's always great. So that's really where we're looking to migrate people from. And when we designed SpecLink, we actually designed it to mimic Word a little bit. And I remember first getting to the company, and I'm like, why are you saying this product's like Word? It's nothing like Word. It acts, there's dynamic linking. It makes things significantly more efficient. It's built specifically for this purpose. And the response I got was actually a very good one. Was we're trying to lower the barrier to entry for people to get shock from moving from Word to a true sort of SaaS-based online tool, right? So I'd love to have taken the UI a different direction and done some more interesting things with it. But ultimately, we're dealing with, and somebody mentioned yesterday, it was Eric actually, like an aging population here, right? We need to use information and technology in our industry more and more to make up for this lack of expertise potential that we have, right? So what we try to do is make that transition as easy as possible, but it's a very, very different way of writing specs, and it's leverages a lot of technology in there, and particularly on the collaboration side and getting into sharing information with different groups and different players. Again, trying to get within that workflow. And
it's very exciting.
Everything
for
uses
us
it.
That first step is you got to get it in the software, Second step is, hey, smart engineers like yourself might add this into your design, and the software just suggesting it for you, you know. That's very exciting.
Just one other thing is my personal strange belief that change in our industry occurs in downtimes. When everybody's busy, no one wants to change their process, right? It's actually hard for us to sell more software in a busy market because spec writers and firms are slammed, and the last thing they want to do is change. And they'll look at me and be like, hey man, this would save me so much time, I just don't have time to migrate to it. So we almost need a bit of a lull. Manufacturers, right, all the time you guys are making everything you can make and selling everything you make. You don't need to get better at what you do because you don't have to compete as much. So that's an interesting little area. Sorry, gentleman there.
Yeah, so question for you. So we build hardware, so supply chain has been a disaster for us, okay? And one of the things that's missing in our tools is knowledge of, okay, if I spec this part, can I get it in 3 weeks? Or we're literally, for some parts, 24 months of lead times, okay, which is insane, right? And that knowledge is now becoming part of our design process. And is that something you're starting to build into your tools? Is that going to change over time?
I was going to say, I was going to say on your chart there, where you're like all this stuff on procurement, you had the estimating, and definitely a call out for lead time is that's got to be a piece of it.
So yeah, the rest of our company, I mentioned earlier that the original RIB business is this tool that really takes you from, you know, BIM model or whatever your input is through to, you know, FM, like building delivery. A big part of that solution is procurement and ultimately scheduling and everything else. So that's really for us the initial easy point of integration is integrating with M2, our own solution in the market, so you can start building some of those factors in. But I mean, I know you deal with this every day.
It's a challenge, but it will be solved with this combination of these software, and then it's going to be mandatory for the manufacturers to upload it, just like you would have now a BIM 3D model or something like that, right? Include the dynamic lead time in real time. So.
Then one other quick thing to mention is put sustainability on there too in a similar way. Like I believe we've talked a lot about it in this conference. One of the biggest barriers to adoption of new materials, et cetera, is the knowledge that the decisions that you make through the design and build process have on the overall building. So like we just built an integration to EC3 data into one of our cost solutions, so that you can calculate that at the point of cost estimate. But again, this information can't just stay there, right? It has to flow and it has to be passed. The next guy along the line shouldn't have to go and calculate all that again, right? It should flow through the system, and that's really what the sort of seismic shift that has to occur. It's going to require a lot of partnerships and integrations to do that, right? So maybe take the last question. I'm sorry.
Where's the crossover between commercial and residential? Will your program get into the residential part? So I assume commercial means multifamily. Would that extend to like a built-to-rent community? Where do you see? I'm interested in the residential application.
Sure.
Not necessarily commercial.
I mean, you could probably speak better to this than I can when it comes to the difference in specs. We are almost entirely commercial just because of the level of detail of a spec and the level of uniqueness of each commercial building requires that. You tend to get a little bit more uniformity in residential. Certainly multifamily is part of our customer set. We don't actually determine what our customers use our service for, so I'm positive that there is residential and different parts that go in. There's a hell of a lot of renovation that goes in to our specification system as well, because a large percentage of projects are renovation projects, right? So,
And I think the important thing, if you've got a product or that you're using the software, from a manufacturer, make sure your product is actually in the software, that your data is in there, that you can be queried and pull it up, and then your teams, as they're, if you're designing or building in the residential space using these software, will make things more consistent. You can the spec live, you can work on it in real time with an engineer from a manufacturer. So you could get on with one of my teams that work with design firms and be looking at the same drawings and be touching it at the same time, and we can help, and say, what, I would do this, not that, right? And then educate, your teams on why, right? That's a simple example.
maybe take this. Okay.
Offline.